You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 AM, a CBS station.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. You're listening to us on CBS radio station 1580 AM in the Washington, D.C. area, or you're streaming us on the web, WMCLive.com, where you can also find links to podcasts of all our previous shows. And let us hear from you. You can tweet us at hashtag WMCLive or email us at womensmediacenterlive@gmail.com. April is Parkinson's disease, shorthand, PD, Awareness Month, and in today's show, we're focusing on women and Parkinson's, those living with the disease, those who are the majority of caregivers for people with Parkinson's, and women in the field of neurology, too. I suggest you keep a pencil and paper handy. You might want to jot down some notes and statistics, and some revelations about sexism in science itself, about my guests, and about myself. So come with me inside the headlines. Inside the headlines this week could just as well be called Inside the Host, me. It's a rerun back to when I first said the personal is political. In April of 2010, I was diagnosed as having Parkinson's disease. Now, before everyone gets dramatic or lugubrious, let's fling some scientific facts into the mistaken assumptions mix. Parkinson's disease, or PD, is not life-threatening. It has a long trajectory of progression, 12, 15, even 20 years sometimes. People who have early onset, in their 30s, say, have a far more challenging span ahead than those of us who are diagnosed in our 60s or 70s. You do the math. I'll be pretty tuckered out by 90 anyway. There's plenty of time ahead for writing, politics, laughter, love. Meanwhile, I'm fine, and my quality of life feels mostly normal. More about all that at the end of the program. A few words about what the disease is, though just a few, since there are excellent FAQs and in-depth explanations on the Parkinson's Disease Foundation and other reliable PD organization websites. Basically, the brain, for various reasons we do not yet understand, stops producing dopamine. There are genetic inheritable factors, but not always, and there are environmental factors, but not always, such as exposure to pesticides or industrial manganese output, and women are more susceptible to these than men. Dopamine is the chemical neurotransmitter responsible for many functions: movement, balance, mood, digestion, dexterity, and in some people vocal projection, sense of smell, color perception, cognition, and more. It's called a boutique disease since everyone has, in effect, her or his unique version of PD, and some clinicians now term it Parkinson's diseases, plural, since the symptoms and progress can be so varied. There is as yet no cure or preventive measure for PD, but there are many, more everyday, medications and treatment techniques that address the symptoms and slow the progression of the disease, which is a degenerative one. You know, I'm seriously unfond of that adjective, which sounds suspiciously like degenerate, thus like a fundamentalist, moralistic denunciation of my state of being. Now, back to the story. The diagnosis was not a shock. My mother had had PD, and for a year and a half, since noticing the first tiny tremor, I'd been pretty sure that this was Parkinson's, not any of the other things I was tested for, by a neurologist convinced I did not have PD. I now know that the average time of misdiagnosis for PD is 3 to 5 years, since the disease can camouflage itself as other maladies, so I was lucky to slog through a mere year and a half. You need a neurologist whose subspecialty is movement disorders, and there are only about 200 such specialists in the United States. I now have a superb one. By the way, don't you think it's fitting that given my life as an activist, I have a movement disorder? Isn't the English language delicious? It was actually a relief to know what I was dealing with. I should say we were dealing with. My friend and son, Blake Morgan, was with me when the diagnosis landed and has been as vital and life-affirming a part of this process as the air I breathe and the poems I write. I took my time to digest the information, knowing it would seep like water through sand, slowly. I began to write about it, what I now call the gray matter poems, which will be in my next book of poetry, writing being my way of understanding what it is I'm living through. I broke into a positive mindset once I realized I need not relate to Parkinson's the way my mother had, first with years of denial and refusal of medication, then decline and self-pity. I have the benefit of support she'd never had, in terms of medical advances, my art and other meaningful work I love, and a sense of global political community. I haven't lived my life the way she did, so I could have my PD, too, my way, which felt liberating. The medication kicked in and the tremors stopped, balance went back to normal, and my bold handwriting returned from being a tiny scrawl. Most important, I had a 4-hour exam of my cognitive functioning, and I aced it. Game on. For several months I kept my story to myself and Blake. In this culture, when you've been a public person, your privacy is considered collective property. Yes, even in the women's movement. And though I knew I would eventually publish what I was writing on the subject, for the time being I rather wisely gave myself privacy. Then I began to tell of very few, very close friends. I was worried that they would henceforth see a sick person when they looked at me and forget that I'm still just me. But they saw me. By now, 3 years in from the diagnosis, my friends and most of my acquaintances all know, but this program is my coming out to a broader audience. I'm so glad I can do it from within the embrace of the Women's Media Center family, dedicated to telling the story of women's realities not yet covered anywhere else. And there's a hell of a story here, nor do I mean just mine. Think of my reaction on learning that the presence of women, and of men of color, in research tests and clinical trials had not substantially improved since the 1986 National Institutes for Health policy that was supposed to correct all that. The subjects in virtually all research programs had previously been male, it being thought that women were basically small men differentiated only by reproductive organs. The heart attack research was particularly scandalous, since based on all male research subjects, the medical establishment assumed women rarely had heart disease. For one thing, women having heart attacks present with different symptoms from men. Still, men were considered the generic. Because the women's health movement protested long and loud, women were finally factored into the research. Consequently, today, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention report that the #1 cause of death for U.S. women is heart disease. Check out the Foundation for Gender-Specific Medicine, that's gendermed.org, and the Society for Women's Health Research, womenshealthresearch.org. gendermed.org and womenshealthresearch.org. By the way, gender-specific research and treatment is in men's self-interest, too. Well, there I was, facing yet another front that needed attention for gender and racial ethnic inclusion, this time one our lives depended on. So I attended an extraordinary 3-day intensive training by the Parkinson's Disease Foundation. This was PAIR, P-A-I-R, which stands for the Parkinson's Advocates in Research. It's a signature program of the foundation, otherwise known as PDF. Through in-person trainings and an online course, it provides people with Parkinson's and their care partners with the knowledge and skills needed to pair up with researchers to bring about better treatments faster. It's now a national network of 200 PDF research advocates from 42 states who work to change how research is done. Impressive. You can learn more about it and you can get involved in research at www.pdf.org. By the way, research needs volunteers without PD, too, for control groups. There are other fine organizations working on Parkinson's education, treatment, research. No one has done more for research than dear Michael J. Fox and his foundation. But you can understand why, despite its acronym sounding like an email attachment, PDF, or the Parkinson's Disease Foundation, so appealed to me. It was empowering the people involved. We are, not passive recipients of advice or treatment, but active, curious, informed participants with a sense of agency and a voice. For someone who's spent decades working with women coming to voice, you see why I've become a friend of PDF. Today's program would not have been possible without their help. My thanks go especially to Carlin Schroeder, Kelly Bresnahan, and Melissa Barry. At the end of the show, I'll have some fighting words about where we go from here. For now, this hour is dedicated to women with Parkinson's and to women care partners. Whenever people find each other through advocacy, it's like the feminist click. That click is electric. It shimmers with energy. It vibrates with possibility. And we have to take a break here. This is Women's Media Center Live, and I am Robin Morgan. When we return, we'll talk with a neurologist whose work focuses on what she calls the underrepresented majority as subjects in crucial research. That is, women and also men of color. After Hurricane Sandy, parts of the East Coast have returned to normal, but others won't see normal again for quite some time. One group getting volunteers and aid supplies to those who need it is called Occupy Sandy. Made up of a coalition of Occupy Wall Street activists, community organizers, and technologists, Occupy Sandy is using social media and other software tools to identify and quickly respond to urgent needs among the hardest-hit communities. You can help. To donate or to volunteer, visit occupysandy.org.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 AM, a CBS station.
Welcome back. Dr. Allison Willis is a neurologist specializing in movement disorders, including Parkinson's. She is assistant professor of neurology at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis, Missouri, and she maintains a clinical practice as well as an active research program. Welcome, Dr. Allison Willis, to Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you.
There aren't an overwhelming amount of women in neurology, are there?
No, there aren't. Neurology is a field in medicine that has traditionally been overrepresented with men. I think that in the past only about 15 to 20% of neurologists were women, but the good news is there is, as with all of medicine, a shifting of the tide, wherein we see a lot of women starting to go into medicine, and neurology is primed to bear those fruits as well. We have more leaders in neurology who are emerging as women.
Yay! It makes me very happy. I mean, I know that there's a lot of women in medicine, but for the earlier foreseeable future, it used to be that we were tracked, just like in school, toward pediatrics. And I always used to say, I want us to be in neurology and brain surgery and all those exciting places. So that's good news.
We are seeing that, and we are also seeing women neurologists becoming leaders in the field. There are neurologists who are women who are leading large departments, who are leading their subspecialties. We're seeing women in neurology become tenured professors and produce valuable research.
You're making my day here. And I know that the subspecialty of movement disorders is even fewer. I think that somebody told me, I believe that there's only 200 in total, or around that figure, in the United States of movement disorder specialists.
Yes, movement disorders as a subspecialty of neurology is also relatively underrepresented compared to larger subspecialties like vascular neurology or stroke neurology and epilepsy. But with the research that is available in movement disorders, we're also seeing an increase in interest in pursuing an academic or a clinical career in movement disorders among our neurology residents.
Oh.
That also is something that's primed to expand and grow in the future to the benefit of everyone, I think.
It is. It definitely is. Well, let's get to some of your research, which I find heartening that it's being done at all, and very interesting, because your research has shown, for example, that there are disparities in care between men and women with Parkinson's.
Yes, my research initially began as I was trained to study environmental risk factors for Parkinson's disease, and as a young subspecialist in training, I took to looking at the previous literature and trying to understand what discoveries other scientists have made and how I could improve upon the body of literature and improve understanding of what we think causes Parkinson's disease. And the one thing that struck me was that all of the previous studies had drawn from subspecialty clinics, not unlike the one that I practice in, a large university-centered subspecialty clinic that attracts people from a certain socioeconomic stratum, and I wondered if that could be the reason why there was so much confusion as to what risk factors were important in Parkinson's disease, and that led me to start looking at people who had Parkinson's disease who didn't see a neurologist, who weren't in the subspecialty clinics, and that is how I found the disparities. And when I say disparities, I mean a difference in the pattern of care between one group and another.
This is gender as well as ethnicity.
Yes. My initial research showed that there are gender as well as race group disparities. Some of my recent research also shows that there are socioeconomic disparities that impact the kind of care that you receive, and perhaps even referral pattern disparities. If one could think about what things have to happen for someone to come into an academic movement disorder center and receive quote-unquote state-of-the-art care, one has to have a support system at home that allows them to travel hours, perhaps, to that academic medical center if you live in a rural area or even in a suburb. One has to have a spouse or a child who can take off of work or arrange for transportation. One has to have things like gas money. I have had patients who've had to save for gas money and in the midst of this recession in order to come see me. And if you don't have the social support, the financial support, the support of your family to be able to take time off of work, or if you don't have the internal interest in taking care of yourself as opposed to taking care of the people around you, these are all things that might lead you to not ever come and see an academic movement disorders specialist, and to receive your care from your primary care physician for the Parkinson's disease.
Right, and we know that women, in fact, are raised and socialized to care for others and not for themselves. So that right away puts us in a risk, gives us an extra risk factor. And then we're not factored into the tests and trials as much as we should be as a patient test trial population, which when I first heard made me mildly crazy, because there was a time when the medical establishment thought that women really rarely got heart attacks, because, of course, we never were in the tests and trials, and we present differently. And when we were factored into the tests and trials, bingo, suddenly heart attack is the second highest cause of death for women. So it gives one pause about Parkinson's, because the numbers are similarly pale and male.
Yes. One thing that is consistent across studies, and again, because this hasn't been specifically followed up upon, we're not certain as to the reason why, but one thing that has been consistent is that women seem less likely to receive a Parkinson's disease diagnosis. And there have been theories that estrogen is neuroprotective because women who have had their ovaries removed seem to have a risk of Parkinson's disease that approaches that of men. However, I think there's always room for the inclusion of underrepresented groups in clinical trials because those are the groups that can teach us something about the disease.
Yes.
Examining and studying people who are at a lower risk of a disease can teach you how to fight it. Examining people of color, such as Asian Americans, people of African ancestry, people of Indian ancestry, who have all been shown to have a lower risk of Parkinson's disease, yet are almost completely excluded from U.S. trials, can teach us something about a treatment for the disease in all Americans.
Yes, and how do we know if they are not included that they have a lower rate of getting the disease? I mean, isn't that a basic question itself, or is that being naive?
Fortunately, some studies, such as some of the research that our group has performed, has shown that these groups have a lower risk using all-inclusive data, meaning we have used Medicare data, which is utilized by 98% of Americans over age of 65 to examine the race distribution of Parkinson's disease in the United States, and found that those groups have a lower risk. And then those countries, health researchers from those countries have also done population studies in their own countries and found that they have a lower risk of Parkinson's disease in those countries. So we have data from our country, and then we have data from those countries that all suggest that there are lower rates of Parkinson's disease among some race groups.
Right.
And we need to be interested as to why that's the case, the same way we need to continue to be interested in whether and why women seem to have a lower risk of Parkinson's disease.
Yes. We've only got a little less than a minute left. What is it that the ordinary person can do to be to move this along further, to move the studies along further, to help support the science?
I think there are several things that one can do. The first thing you can do if you are a patient who has Parkinson's disease is begin a conversation with your physician. If you are interested in research, if you are interested in getting a second opinion about your condition, have a conversation with your primary care physician and ask about whether referral is appropriate. Ask about whether there are any clinical trials that may be of help. I think getting involved with a lot of the patient-driven advocacy groups is very helpful, including the American Parkinson's Disease Association, the National Parkinson Foundation, the Parkinson's Disease Foundation. Those are all great avenues to make your voice heard. At this point, it seems, according to our recent data, that only half of people in this country over the age of 65 who have Parkinson's disease are ever going to be captured by the current way of performing studies, and so I call them the underrepresented majority.
Wow.
And I encourage them to make their voices heard.
You bet. Yeah. Well, is there anything else coming down the pike we should know about in terms of research?
My lab's research is now actually going to focus on what I call the underrepresented majority. We're going to start seeking out those people who have Parkinson's disease and who are not captured by the current specialty care system model in order to look at how their disease responds to medication, to closely examine what kind of care they're being given, and in particular look at how disease progression varies in women and non-whites in order to give us clues as to what new treatments could be helpful.
That's wonderful. That's great to hear. Thank you, Allison, for being here with us on Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's time for another pause. This is Women's Media Center Live, and I am still Robin Morgan. And you know what's more? I intend to be Robin Morgan for a long time. News You Can Use is coming right up, as is a conversation with a caregiver and caregiving expert on what it is she and other, mostly women, caregivers need in support.
When it comes to talk radio, men still do most of the talking. It doesn't get too much better if you look at television, newspapers, film, video games, social media, literature, sports, and corporate or technology leadership. The Women's Media Center's Status of Women in the U.S. Media 2013 report details the persistent gender disparity in a range of media institutions that rank among the greatest influencers in American society. To read the full report, go to womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 AM, a CBS station.
And we are back with some news you can use. I'm going to share just a few of the many actions and activities taking place during Parkinson's Disease Awareness Month. Primarily among them, representatives of PAIR. You remember that stands for Parkinson's Advocates in Research Program. From out of Parkinson's Disease Foundation. PAIR representatives are hosting events all around the country to educate communities about the disease, to bring together researchers from the major movement disorder centers of the various cities, and together with people with Parkinson's and their care partners to discuss the latest research, how to become involved, how to volunteer for programs, etc. There's one, for example, in Phoenix, Arizona. There's one in Denver, Colorado. You can find them all by going to pdf.org and checking the events calendar. And it's divided by city and state, and you can just have a ball there. Speaking of a ball, there is one, Celebrate Spring Boston, Friday, April 26th, which is a dance to support PDF's research programs. You can find out about that on the website, too. And then there's the Parkinson's Unity Walk, Saturday, April 27th, 8:30 in the morning till 12 p.m. in Central Park, New York. That's all the groups, Michael J. Fox Foundation, Parkinson's Disease Foundation, National Parkinson's Foundation, everybody in unity. You can stop by PDF's booths and pick up educational materials. And then last, there's the annual Parkinson's Awareness Walk Over Water. I said over, not on. Sunday, April 28th, 1 to 3 p.m. in Poughkeepsie, New York. Remember, for information and to sign up for any of these events and to find out about more of them, pdf.org. By the way, the PDF website is in Spanish as well as English, and I say good for them. Y muchas gracias, compañeros. Now, to our next guest, the caregiver. The Caregiver Action Network offers data stating that caregivers are 66% female. Well, the women's movement, factoring in household work and parenting, puts the figure at over 90%. Caregiving is the foundation of the world's economy, though most nations list this unwaged labor of largely women, if they list it at all, as, quote, unproductive in their official statistics. Caregiving for someone living with PD is a specialty in itself. Rhona Johnson worked in publishing before becoming the caregiver to her husband, who had Parkinson's. Since his death, she has remained active in the PD community as a speaker and a group facilitator, educating about PD and about caregiving. Welcome, Rhona, to Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you, Robin. I'm thrilled to be with you today.
On the PDF, that is Parkinson's Disease Foundation, pdf.org website, if you go there and do a search for her name, it's Rhona with an H, R-H-O-N-A, Johnson with an H, you will find an extremely good piece that she wrote. I guess it was a speech, Rhona, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Called the PD Partnership. And you pioneered the phrase care partners, which is quite profound. Talk a little about that.
Well, I guess that my husband and I sort of realized early on, soon after his diagnosis, that there were really the two of us in this. And so we both tried to work together to tackle, all the challenges that it brought. And one way, he was a scientist by background, so he dove into the subject and found out as much as he could about it. And I followed a little reluctantly initially. And we learned a great deal about it, and were able to get a lot of help from a support group locally, and then also support other people. And that certainly makes the disease somewhat easier to handle when you get involved.
I mean, caregiving itself, which is a huge contribution, ironically, that women make to the GDP, because it's, in effect, unpaid labor. I mean, we don't think of it that way because it's usually labor toward someone we love, whether it's an adult who's ill or a child. But it is unpaid labor that the government benefits from and does not necessarily respond to with comparable support. You and I have talked off air about what the beginnings even of a wish list would be for real support for someone in a care partnership, specifically but not exclusively with Parkinson's. Let's share some of that, please.
Okay, yes. The services that I see are needed are really in order so that, because taking care of the caregiver has to be the priority, because if we care for them, they will be able to endure and go through sometimes a very, many years of caregiving. Mm-hmm. So we need them to care for themselves, otherwise they literally fall down on the job. And of course our costs go sky high. One of the big problems I see is that service and support for care partners may exist on a community-by-community basis or through some non-profits. But I would love to see a national clearinghouse to track down the sort of services that are available for care partners. It takes a lot of time individually for them to go on the net and to make multiple telephone calls, fill in paperwork, just to find out help, perhaps transporting their partner to some event. So a national clearinghouse is for that kind of information would be wonderful.
Other countries have this, don't they?
Yes, I believe they do. And when a person is diagnosed with Parkinson's in some other countries, they're assigned to someone who's almost like their team leader, who helps them get to, assemble and tap the resources when they need them. Here, caregivers are very much on their own, and they rely on word of mouth, or they rely on going on the net, or things that they can learn through family and friends.
Not as civilized as it could be. Anyway, go on with your wish list.
Yes, well, I would, I guess the first one I thought of was I would love a national 24-hour helpline for care partners of people with Parkinson's to help them deal with sudden emergencies. I remember still this day an emergency that we had. My husband we'd been in the emergency room at our local hospital for about 6 hours, and we left at 1 a.m. on a Saturday morning, which is an awful time to leave a hospital. And we drove home. I was trying to figure out how I'd get him up the stairs and into the house. But more overwhelming was he'd had a catheter inserted, and we had absolutely no idea how to manage it. And there was a nursing visit that would be scheduled for Monday, and until then we were on our own. And if I could have called one number and got a nurse on the phone, I would have been enormously relieved. Very often people just need practical help. It's not complex. It's very often practical help. There's one big area that people struggle with, and that is finding adult daycare centers, and not only that they be accessible, but also they be subsidized, that they be affordable. Yeah. And there's very little underwriting or help that you can get paying for adult daycare. Incidentally, I'd love to find another name that's more appealing than adult daycare.
Yes, we've got
men particularly recoil at the idea. They don't like that.
Well, I'm a word person, so I will work on that.
You'll work on that.
Yes.
Okay. But if they can go to a daycare place, then they have it breaks up the routine, the familiarity of home for both of the partners, and gives everybody a rest. And many caregivers, of course, work, so they can go off and work. But it's an expensive service.
I bet.
Yes.
There was another item that seemed so obvious and so simple, and on your list, and I thought, of course, more unisex and family restrooms in public places.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is obvious. I can remember with my husband barging into men's restrooms, or we'd barge together into the women's restroom. I never figure out which was the best to go. But, I sort of thought about it. If we're coping with this, then everybody around us has to cope with this.
Well, it's taken 40 years of this contemporary wave of the women's movement making the demand about public restrooms that have changing tables for infants, and in most airports and large public venues like that, you will find a public restroom, usually a branch off the women's room, but sometimes smart enough so that it is neither. And men with infants, which happens more and more, can also use it. But we haven't yet got them to the point where they would realize that the disabled community could use it as well.
Yes.
The adult, So.
Yes. So it doesn't seem complicated to do that, but it would it would be huge.
And you also had more transportation, of course, for the disabled.
Yes.
And doctors' visits, paid time off to accompany their person with Parkinson's to doctor's visits.
Yes. That's extremely important, and it also this would save tax dollars, medical dollars, because if two people go to the visit and are listening and are asking questions, they'll get much better information. And also, medications for Parkinson's are very complex.
Yes, they are. I mean, this country has a way of saying the advice will be always bring a patient advocate with you to a doctor's visit, particularly if it's a serious matter. And then there will be silence, no support for doing so.
Right.
So you're always caught twixt the devil and the deep blue, what. And then you also had this interesting notion, it's not even a notion, it's just a damn good idea, medical team leader. That is sort of a quarterback for the people with Parkinson's as diagnosed, to help assemble and tap these resources as they're needed. Yeah.
Yes. People with Parkinson's begin to need help, very often speech therapy or physical therapy, and help with locating correct exercise programs. And again, if it falls on the caregiver, it takes a lot of time, or they don't realize they need these things.
It needs, as in some cases, there would be in a hospital a social worker who appears after an operation or something and says, let me help you, find this or do that. It needs that, but it needs that consistently, and it needs that subsidized for it to be a compassionate, civil, and money saving. You're absolutely right. Billions of dollars are flushed because of this non-support.
Yes, I happen to think in all these suggestions they're money saving, they're tax dollar saving, because they're avoiding falls, they're avoiding mistakes in medication, on and on.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, some of this advice is is available, but that's not the job of the different foundations. Parkinson's Disease Foundation, PDF.org, has a lot of questions and answers to questions on their website. Yes. But we're talking here about that part of the population that is women and Parkinson's. I'm so grateful to you for being here and being with us, Rhona.
Oh, Robin, I've been very, very happy to talk to you.
And I'm also just so awed and admiring of the work that you do and continue to do.
You. Thank you.
Thank you for being with Women's Media Center Live. It's time for another pause. I'm Robin Morgan here with Women's Media Center Live. We'll be back with a dynamo of a woman who is living with Parkinson's, and the emphasis is on the word living.
Parkinson's disease affects as many as 1 million people in the United States. This April, during Parkinson's Awareness Month, the Parkinson's Disease Foundation focuses on the millions of women who live with Parkinson's or who care for a partner with Parkinson's. Learn how to make a difference and help improve research, care, and support for these women by visiting www.pdf.org or calling 800-457-6676.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 AM, a CBS station.
Welcome back again. A former learning consultant in the New Jersey school system, Lori Katz is now a Parkinson's disease activist who has her own newsletter with information on PD-related activities in her area. She volunteers in the physical therapy department of Pennsylvania Hospital, and she has been trained as a research advocate of the Parkinson's Disease Foundation. What's more, she founded one of the very first Parkinson's women's support groups in the country. Welcome, Lori, to Women's Media Center Live.
Thanks, Robin. It's nice to hear your voice.
Well, it's very good to have you here. And there's so much to talk about. I'm going to just start right in to not waste time. Talk a little about early onset PD and your experience with that.
Yeah, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's when I was 52. And I'm sure I know I had symptoms prior to 52. It just took a while to diagnose me. It's interesting because I'm considered early onset, and I will always be considered having early onset or young onset, so I always think of myself as being young.
Well, you are, given your activism, which is awesome. You're a woman after my own heart.
Thank you.
I know that in terms of the dopamine agonists, which often cause really bizarre and unwieldy side effects, you suffered particularly, and I would think it's important to tell that story because of other women's, the effect on other women.
Right. Well, after my diagnosis, I began treatment, but that initially included a lot of exercise, and eventually I went on medication. And as I'm sure you talked about, they change medications often in order to keep you at your optimum ability to function. Mm-hmm. And truly I've been fortunate because my disease has progressed somewhat slowly, so I've really maintained a lot of the activities I've enjoyed over the past 8 years. And that was because I was taking medication. One of them, as you said, fell under in the class of dopamine agonists. It's a medication similar to dopamine, but it activates the dopamine receptors. They prescribe dopamine agonists for younger patients. Mm. So I was on a dopamine agonist for about 2 years, and I was probably on the highest dose you could take. And due to continued motor problems, they decided that it was time to introduce taking regular dopamine in addition to the agonist. And within a day or two of adding that new drug, I developed a severe side effect, which really took months to resolve. Honestly, it took more than months. It took years. 1 in 7 people taking dopamine agonists end up with some sort of impulse control disorder. Mm-hmm. Which could be excessive shopping, gambling, binge eating, hoarding, hypersexuality, and in my case, and it was an arousal disorder called PGAD, or persistent genital arousal disorder. And the doctors in the Parkinson's community group PGAD with hypersexuality. And one of the points I'd like to make very strongly today is that hypersexuality and PGAD are two very different things and need to be treated in very different ways.
They even sound different. I mean, when there are Viagra commercials on television, it always says if you have an erection lasting longer than 4 hours, get yourself to an emergency room. So why wouldn't they think the same thing about women?
Right. Well, and that's very interesting. I agree with you that women and sexuality are not looked at the same as men.
Oh, you think?
Yeah. Anyway, one of the things with hypersexuality is people engage in like risky sexual behaviors, and they have lowered sexual inhibitions, and it really affects their lives. And while PGAD affected my life tremendously, I wasn't going out and having multiple partners or watching porn on television, but I did have this constant arousal 24/7.
It's very painful.
It's painful, and interestingly, now the pain doctors are the people who deal with PGAD, and the sexual medicine community, which is a fairly small community. But for me, it was not painful. It was just an arousal. And it was, first I didn't know what it was. When we finally diagnosed it, it took forever to find the right treatments in order for me to get better. And, I have to say I had I still do have a very supportive husband, and neurologist and a pelvic floor physical therapist who were my guardian angels during that time, because this was all new to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's how incredibly mind-boggling and confusing it must be, not knowing what to do about it and where it came from. And I'm sure that in the society at large, if you mentioned it at all, it was treated salaciously with chuckles and total lack of respect for the seriousness of the situation.
Right. And, dopamine agonists are not the only cause of PGAD. I mean, it can be caused by pudendal nerve entrapment, something called Tarlov cysts. You could get it as a result of having surgery or, an injury, to that part of your body. So, it's a small number of women who have the reaction to dopamine agonists like I did. But I have talked to a number of them, and, everybody's just, at the wit's end what to do. And how do you explain it to other people?
Yeah. It
just isn't something you go up to someone and say, oh, my back hurts. So,
no.
PGAD.
No, exactly. That reminds me that anybody who is interested in contacting Lori for more information about this, she has graciously set up a special email, and so get your pencils out, because in a little bit we're going to give that email, and she's willing to be contacted and to help network people with solutions and counsel, which is very sisterly. And now, speaking of sisterly, I want to get into the fact that you formed one of the first women's with Parkinson's groups, on the basis that even though there are mixed gender support groups, there are things like, for example, PGAD, that a woman wouldn't necessarily want to talk about in a mixed gender group.
Right, and that was really true, because during the time when I was experiencing this, I became very depressed, and, except for my husband, I really didn't have anybody who I could go into detail about what was going on.
Right.
So as I started to heal, I realized, I certainly couldn't go to the support group, the early onset support group that I go to most of the time, and talk about this at all. So I felt that, there was a need for a women's support group. And we started in September of 2011. Interestingly, we met at a coffee shop thinking we'd be a small group, and we outgrew the coffee shop that first day.
Wow. That is great. That is great.
It was obviously a need.
What kinds of specific, give some examples of the things that the women raise.
Sometimes sometimes we have speakers come in, and talk about things that are interesting to people with women with Parkinson's. But we were able to, for example, have my pelvic floor physical therapist come and speak about urinary tract problems and sexual problems.
Right.
We just had a young doctor who's a fellow at Penn come and speak about intimacy and chronic illness, which was interesting. We also talk about medications and diet and exercise.
Right.
So, we touch on a lot of topics, but also what we try to do is have our women bring up topics that affect them. For example, one woman had a lot of her friends drop her because she had a chronic illness. Oh. And it was just devastating. And, that was more important than doing what we had planned.
Yes, of course.
Where we had another woman who had to change doctors, and she was very upset about that. So we were able to give her support. And each person is able to share their experiences, and I think that's the most important part of our group.
Yes.
Is that you can talk to someone who can say, that really happened to me, and this is how I dealt with it.
Right. It's what in feminist consciousness raising I always called the "you too" moment.
Right.
When you suddenly realize you're not alone in the world, and there's a mirror effect, and it's just magic. It's magic.
Right.
Lori, give the email address.
It's Lori Katz 3295 @gmail.com.
And it's Lori with an I and Katz with a Katz, so that's
right.
Lori Katz 3295 @gmail.com. I'm so grateful to you for being with us on Women's Media Center Live, and we'll come back and revisit this subject again because there's lots more to say.
Thank you, Robin.
And now it's time for fighting words. I have a little correction. I gave two conflicting statistics a little earlier, and the first one, I was correct the first time. Heart disease is the highest, not the second highest cause of death for women and men together, both. But back to PD. 1 million Americans have Parkinson's, and it's expected to double by 2040 as the population ages. Just want to throw a few more consciousness-raising facts at you, plus a personal update. The estimated economic burden of PD is $14.4 billion a year. Men are 1.5 times more likely to have PD than women, except I would add, how can we be absolutely certain about that given the skewed research subject population? Women are 10% less likely to see a neurologist, which of course could improve their care. Occupational exposure to certain chemicals, PCBs, is associated with greater risk for Parkinson's in women, but not in men. Women exhibit more dyskinesias, that's involuntary movement in later stages, than men. Women report more anxiety and depression, issues that have been somewhat neglected in research until recently. There are very few trials that analyze data separately for men and women. Women are traditionally underrepresented in research studies. PDF research advocates pair address this underrepresentation of women and other inequalities in research and care. And PDF offers a toll-free helpline and free educational materials available at 1-800-457-6676. That's 1-800-457-6676, or the website, www.pdf.org. As for me, this is actually a good time in my life. Listen, I am not saying Disney stuff like, oh, this disease is the best thing that's ever happened to me. It is so not the best thing that's ever happened to me. But hey, the Sombrero Galaxy is serenely undisturbed. Some of PD is actually funny. Here's a new way to brush your teeth. If you skip your meds and hold your toothbrush up to your face, you don't need an electric one. You can also scramble eggs just by holding the bowl. Though you do have to be careful not to stab yourself in the eye with a mascara wand. Such an embarrassing way to go blind. And if you get overtired but try to stride down the street as usual, you're going to weave, which means passers-by will think you're drunk, and you won't even have had any fun earning their disapproval. Seriously, I know there's some heavy going ahead. But as Hamlet knew, readiness is all. and I feel ready for whatever comes. Besides, Parkinson's brought me the gift of urgency, a concrete reminder of our shared, inevitable mortality, and I, being as much a lazy procrastinator as anybody, appreciate a deadline. Meanwhile, I'm exercising like crazy, which is shown to be vital in slowing the disease's progress, and the disease is moving slowly. The meds are so far working well, and I feel generally good and busy. Since the diagnosis, I've finished a new novel, and I'm working on a new book of poems which will contain the gray matter Parkinson's poems. I've written quite a few essays, articles, blogs, some of which went flatteringly viral. I've worked with the Women's Media Center as a board member and embarked on a new career, or rather returned to one I had at age 4 on the radio, with this program. I've been delighted to be part of Makers, The Women Who Make America, the documentary and the website. I'm still global editor for Ms., and I serve on the steering committee of the important new NGO, Donor Direct Action. I've gardened. You should see my old English roses until my back is in spasm, but my soul is in bliss. I've cooked some great dinners for dear friends, and we've sat in the garden drinking wine and talking and laughing while fireflies darted through the splashes of my home-built waterfall. I cherish the women friends I've had for decades, as they do me. I've made new ones, younger ones, too. I've grown even closer to and slightly more reliant on Blake while celebrating his entering the fullness of a different manhood than the one this culture plans for males, and while getting to watch his talent mature and hear his art, his music, flourish. So life is good. I'll keep you posted. And let's do something about the underrepresented majority in medical research. And what about those PCBs? Damn, women's work really is never done. And that's it for this week. You've been listening to us on CBS station 1580 AM radio in Washington, D.C., and on the web at WMClive.com, which also has podcasts of previous shows. Remember to email us at womensmediacenterlive@gmail.com. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Views expressed here do not represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. WMC President and for this program Executive Producer Julie Burton, Senior Producer Crystal Williams-Chancellor, Technical Director Michelle Kinsey-Bruns, and our founding sponsor Regina Kulik-Scully. I'm Robin Morgan. Thanks for being with us. Join us next week when our show airs right after Equal Pay Day. And whatever happened to that, huh? Despite the crucial Lilly Ledbetter Act, women still earn only 77 cents on the dollar compared to men. So a union organizer, a scholar of pink-collar ghetto jobs, an advisor on feminist investing, and an expert in women's global economic impact will be with us, figuring out what to do next. Only here on Women's Media Center Live.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 AM, a CBS station.